Let's look at problem number 1 in the sample test problems for test number 1 in Math 107. You're choosing between two texting plans. Sprint charges 20 cents per text for customers who do not include texting in their monthly plan. AT&T charges $20 per month for unlimited texting for individual plans. Part A, for each company, find a formula for the cost, which we're going to denote as C, for sending X text messages. Okay, so let's find the cost for the Sprint company. And I'm just going to use a little s here as a subscript to say that represents the cost for Sprint. And I'll use C sub A that represents the cost for AT&T. So the cost for the Sprint plan depends on how many texts you sent, because they're 0.2 or 20 cents for each text, and X represents how many texts you're going to send. However, the AT&T plan is $20 per month, and it doesn't matter how many texts you send. So those are the two formulas to determine the cost, the monthly cost for text messages sent under the Sprint plan and AT&T. Part B asks us to write and solve an appropriate equation to find the number of texts. So we're trying to find the number of texts, which is X. So we're going to be solving for X here, needed to make the cost of each plan the same. So the cost for the Sprint plan is represented by C sub S, and the cost for the AT&T plan is represented by C sub A. So we want to know, when will those two costs be equal? So where we see the cost for the Sprint company, we take this expression and we replace C sub S with that. And where we see the cost for AT&T, we replace it with 20. Now our job is to solve this for X. So to get 1X here, we divide both sides by 0.20. And on this side, we get X, and 20 divided by 0.20 is 100. So we have just found that if we send 100 texts, the cost for each plan will be the same. And you can go back and check that. The cost for Sprint, if we send 100 texts, is 0.20 times 100, which equals 20. That's $20. And of course, the cost for the AT&T plan is also 20. So when we send 100 texts, we get the same cost with each company. On the graph below, show the total cost. The graph below shows the total cost for the Sprint and AT&T plans in terms of the number of texts. So the first thing you should probably do is make sure you know which one of these lines represents the cost for the Sprint text plan and which one represents the cost for the AT&T. Well, if you notice, we have a horizontal line that goes through 20. So this is the cost for the AT&T plan. It's constant, regardless of how many texts you sent out in a month. Notice that the Sprint plan, however, if you don't send any texts out, your charge would be 0. So the more texts you send, the greater your cost. So this is the cost for Sprint. Let's see what questions they're asking us to answer now. Fill in the coordinates for point A. So what is point A doing here? Point A represents the number of texts that will make each plan have the same cost, which is what we found in part A. So that point is 100, 20. 100, 20. If I send out 100 texts, my cost is $20. D asks us to write an inequality in terms of X to answer the following question. When will Sprint be the less expensive option? So basically, that's when we're looking at, here's our cost for Sprint, and anytime I'm below $20, which is the horizontal line, I am going to be the cheaper plan. And when I get to 100 texts, my cost is exactly the same. So anytime I send less than 100 texts, when X, the number of texts, is less than 100, remember X is the number of texts per month, then my cost for the Sprint plan will be less than the AT&T plan. Now we're making an assumption here. We know that it's not possible for X to be negative, although this particular inequality would include negative numbers. So given the context of the problem, we would accept this answer, and we would also accept this answer. Okay, so either one of those would be fine. Actually, we'd put an equal sign for 0 because 0 is less than 20. Okay, let's take a look at the next problem. But before I do that, I'll save this problem to a separate video. So if you're all set with this problem, you don't have to listen to the whole thing before we go on to number 2.